Good afternoon. This is Mars.
Risk mode under
Our tachometer started and descending. We're at 150 meters per second.
This is actually a video of Mars,
Dynamic
of the surface of
stage.
Mars,
Come
that
back
some
again
friends
with,
of mine
risk
and
mode
I
dynamics.
made. It was a really hard video to make.
We're at 9 kilometers descending.
The truth is, we actually just held the camera. The camera was built by Malin Space Systems in San Diego, California, and this video is taken as it's strapped to the world's largest extraterrestrial rover, the rover Curiosity. And my friends and I were in charge of landing her safely on the ground, on Mars, so she could do her mission. And I want to talk to you today about that process and maybe why we should do stuff like that. Now, NASA wanted us to put Curiosity down on Mars, and in a very special place, this place, the Gale Crater. A huge crater that sits on the equator. It's 90 miles across. You can see it in the outside of this image. You can see the crater rim, and coming out of the center of the crater is Mount Sharp, a massive mountain sitting 15,000 feet tall, higher than anything in the continental US. Images like this used to keep me up at night. This is actually a digital elevation map made from orbiter science overflight data and rendered to be elevation correct and set at a perspective of about flying 40,000 feet in a jet. This kind of image would wake me up every night at about 2:30 in the morning as I would worry about ways for us to get our rover safely down there in the shadows between the proverbial rock and a hard place on the flats of the crater floor down there. Now, we'd been going to Mars before. We'd been there with legged landers. We'd been there with rovers, 97 with this little tiny Sojourner rover, 2004 with twins, Spirit and Opportunity, and then in 2012 with the behemoth, the big Curiosity rover. That was our assignment. Land the world's largest extraterrestrial rover down there between the rock and the hard place. Landing such a big beast was a big challenge. We used all the techniques that we'd ever used before. We tried airbags. That's how we'd cushioned the final impact of the little Curiosity rover, Sojourner rover, and the twins, Spirit and Opportunity. But at 900 kilos, Curiosity was just too big for us to land. There's no fibers known to humankind from which we can make a bag that's strong enough to withstand the impact. So that was out. We thought about legged landers like we used with Apollo or used with Viking. But we had some failures in our early exploration associated with legged landers. They are just a little tippy on rough and uneven terrain, and you put a 900-kilo rover on top of it, and they get tippier still. So that was out. We tried to solve the tippiness problem by adding legs, splaying the legs out, and letting the lander do a belly flop. Now, unfortunately, our fuel tanks are in the belly, and our fuel is toxic and explosive, and exploding on touchdown is considered very poor form. So we armored the belly of the beast to protect the tanks, and by the time we were done with that, she was basically too heavy to launch. So in the fall of 2003, we gathered everybody together who had ever worked on a mission to Mars, all the principals, there are about a dozen of us, and we brainstormed for several days to try and figure out a way of getting this big rover to the surface of Mars. The science we wanted to do meant that the rover was big, but we didn't know how we would land her, that little final piece. When we emerged from that room, we had this idea. And we knew two things immediately. One, sound engineering principles had brought us to that idea. And two, every time we spoke of it, we would lose credibility. It would just leach from us. Because people would look at it and they would say, that's crazy. In fact, I had to do a lot of the talking, and I got so tired of losing my credibility that I came up with a pithy little statement, I would say, before I'd even begin to talk about the sky crane. It goes like this: great works and great folly may be indistinguishable at the outset. I love sayings like this because it's true and meaningless at the same time. The truth in it, of course, is probably obvious to you, right? If something's extremely novel, if it's very, very unusual, there'll be no point of reference and it will appear crazy. The meaninglessness of this statement is that crazy also looks crazy. So how do you differentiate between your design and craziness? Just because you say this in front of a room doesn't mean that the next things that come out of your mouth are good ideas. But I promise you, if you do say this in front of a room, no matter what you say, people will go, could be a great work. Now, unfortunately, the team ourselves labored under this question. Was what we were doing a good idea or great folly? And we have no way here on Earth to test our system, to really understand if it would work. We can do analysis, pen and paper at first, computer analysis later. This is one of millions of computer simulations that we did. Here we're landing on a slope so slippery the rover cannot rove, and yet we can touch her down safely. Results like this buoyed our confidence, but computer simulation, modeling in general, suffers from not protecting you against sins of omission, the I forgots. If I make a model of the universe in my computer in ones and zeros, and I omit an important law of physics, the computer will just trudge along and give me an answer for this new universe I've created inside the computer. And it may or may not be at all related to what fate awaits us when we get to Mars. So when it came right down to it, the team had to gather together, collectively hold our breath, and hope that what we had done was in fact not great folly, but perhaps a great work.
Coming up on entry. Vehicle reports entry interface. At this time, it will begin pressurizing the propulsion system to increase the thrust of the system. We'll use that for all the maneuvering in the atmosphere we're about to do. The vehicle has just reported via tones that it has started guided entry. At this time. We have seen peak deceleration. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. The parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Speed chill has separated. We're found the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers descending. Standing by for batch shell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at an altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane is started.
Signal to us, you remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
So that was a good night. That was a great night. Infinitely preferable to the fate that could have awaited us if things had gone a little differently. A whole lot of things had to go right for that night to look like that. A whole lot of people had to work together to make a night like this. In fact, over 3,000 women and men from 37 states and 7 countries in an effort that spanned 9.5 years, almost a decade. Millennia of human effort went into making such a good night. Now, that was just the landing. We took images of the underside of the rover to make sure that we hadn't landed her on a rock. I would not be here today if we had. And then she went off on her surface mission. All of the landing folks went off and got new jobs, and a whole team came to operate her on the surface. She took her robotic arm with a drill, drilled holes into the bedrock of Mars, extracted powder, distributed that powder to science instruments inside the belly of the rover, and gave the scientists back on here, Earth, the answer to the question that she was sent to ask. Yes, the ancient aqueous environment of Mars, the ancient wet Mars, 3.5 billion years ago, when life was first starting here on Earth, that wet Mars would have supported life. The conditions were right. We don't know today whether it did support life, whether there was life there, whether life was there and died, or whether there's life still there today. But we know that early wet Mars was habitable, just like early wet Earth. So there she is. 2,000 pounds of American ingenuity, according to Stephen Holdren, the president's science advisor. But this image gives a question to me. Why do we do this? Why did 3,000 of my colleagues spend the better part of a decade of their lives? Why did I spend the better part of a decade of my life helping build a robot to go root around in the dirt on another planet? Is it particularly practical? Sometimes when I wonder about practicality, I get confused when I look at human behavior, but I know some things are practical. This is practical. Not the selfie, but the 737-700 in the background. I'm going to get on that airplane from Bob Hope Airport in Burbank, and it's going to take me down to Houston Hobbies Airport, just outside the gates of the Johnson Space Center. That trip takes me about 3 hours and 15 minutes. When my mother was my age, that trip would have taken 3 days. When her mother was my age, it would have taken 3 weeks. Air travel has fundamentally revolutionized the way we think about our society, the way we move goods and services. But if you look at early exploration of flight, you do not see anything that portends the dramatic impact on society that we'll have. Early explorers seem a little funny. Early explorers are frequently injured, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes humiliated. I mean, this guy, I don't know really what he was thinking. And unfortunately, all too often, early explorers paid with the greatest of prices. And yet, we kept doing it. Actually, despite it being impractical, we kept at it. And eventually, we tamed the skies, even though for years, air travel would be a risky proposition. So we do not explore because it is practical. In fact, I think we explore despite it being impractical. Do we do it for the laudable science of it? Here is an image of Times Square on landing night. Chock full of folks. I'm told it was a lightning storm. Thousands of people gathered to watch us land on the big jumbo screen. Now, are they there because they're just dying to know about the pH and salinity of the ancient aqueous environment on Mars? I don't think so. I think it's more akin to when tens of thousands gather to see if an athlete can cross a set distance in just a fraction of a second faster than another athlete. When we explore, I think we're asking questions about ourselves as individuals, as teams, as a nation, as a people. When we explore, we're searching for the edge of us. Neil Armstrong understood that, I think, with the words that he would choose to say when he'd first stepped foot on the moon. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. He was hinting that he was carrying us with him, that his exploration was our exploration. And as he became a little bit more that tiny footprint juxtaposed against the vast emptiness of space, we all became a little bit more. When we explore, we're really acting out some fundamental gesture of our humanity. Our curiosity, it's in our genes. We are born through hips too narrow to pass a fully baked human brain. We come into this world less capable than all of our primate brothers and sisters, and we come almost completely unprogrammed, save for a few lines of code, perhaps the most important of which is be curious. It is by our curiosity, by our exploration that comes from that we develop our understanding of the universe afresh each generation. That feature of our species makes us more able to adapt to change and more able to be more successful than, as we observe, any other creatures on this earth. In fact, the only thing that ever kills us now is ourselves. So I think exploration is an important gesture of our humanity. Well, what's next for NASA? The scientists tell us that to really understand the secrets of Mars, to really unlock them, we've got to bring a piece of Mars back to Earth. It's called Mars Sample Return. It takes 3 missions. It's a titanic effort. And we are, in the year 2020, starting the first of that leg. And I am proud to be the chief engineer of that effort. But Mars is not the only place to explore. Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter, a thin ice crust covering a liquid water ocean, more volume than all the seas on Earth doubled. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I have friends who are exobiologists. We drink beer together, and they tell me that Europa is the #1 spot in the solar system that could have life. So now, when I look at this image, it doesn't wake me up at night. In fact, it makes me feel very humble, very proud, but also tremendously lucky to have been at the point of an expression of our collective humanity. But it also leaves me with a question. When I follow my curiosity, when I allow myself to explore, when I express my individual humanity in that regard, great things happen. What might happen when you let your curiosity free? Where will your curiosity next take you? Thank you very much for your attention.